I spent the morning of my college graduation peeling my thighs off the vinyl seats of the 4-2 North bus. It smelled like damp pennies and stale bleach. 2 miles away, my younger sister was inhaling the fresh leather scent of her brand new Tesla. Happy graduation to me. The kitchen island was cold against my forearms. It was 7 a.m., and the house smelled like burnt toast and Diane's expensive French roast coffee. My mother didn't like being called Mom when she was stressed, and on the day her eldest daughter was graduating with honors, she was apparently very, very stressed. "It's just a matter of logistics, Sadie," Diane said, not looking at me. She was vigorously wiping down the already spotless marble counter with a microfiber cloth. The rhythmic swish was the only sound in the room, save for the hum of the refrigerator. My father, Richard, was inspecting a scuff on his Italian leather loafer. He hadn't made eye contact with me since I walked into the kitchen carrying my graduation cap in a plastic grocery bag so the cat wouldn't chew the tassel. "Logistics," I repeated. The word felt thick and useless in my mouth. "Yes," Richard chimed in, finally looking up, though his gaze landed somewhere near my collarbone. Harper's appointment at the dealership got moved up. They said if we don't pick up the Model Y by 9, they can't guarantee the white-on-white interior hold. You know how these supply chains are. I stared at them. I felt a laugh building in my chest, a dark, heavy thing that tasted like battery acid, but I swallowed it down. I was wearing a cheap, synthetic blue gown that was already making my armpits sweat, despite the air conditioning. I had spent the last 4 years pulling double shifts at a diner that smelled permanently of old grease and floor wax just to pay the tuition they had promised to cover before the market took a dip. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my voice deadpan. I wasn't going to cry. Crying was for people who still had hope. "You're taking my sister to a Tesla dealership on the morning of my college graduation. We're coming right to the stadium afterward," Diane said brightly, finally looking at me. Her smile was tight, the corners of her mouth pulling against the Botox. "We'll be there in plenty of time for your walk. But it just doesn't make sense for us to drive all the way to the dealership, pick up the car, drive back here to get you, and then go to the stadium. It's inefficient." "Inefficient." "Exactly," Richard said, relieved I had supplied the word. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small, rectangular piece of cardboard. He slid it across the marble island. It made a soft, scraping sound. I looked down. It was a loaded Metro card. "The 4-2 North stops right at the end of the subdivision," Diane offered, her tone shifting to that of a helpful stranger giving directions. "It's a straight shot to the university. You can just relax, listen to a podcast. No traffic stress." From upstairs, a door opened, and Harper floated down the carpeted steps. She was 20, perfectly tanned, and smelled of Santal, 33 and privilege. She was wearing a linen sundress that cost more than my first semester's books. "Are we ready?" Harper asked, jingling an empty keychain on her finger. She looked at me, taking in the polyester gown and the plastic grocery bag. "Oh, hey, happy graduation, Sadie. Love the robe." "Very. Judicial." She didn't mean it maliciously. That was the worst part about Harper. She wasn't an evil stepsister. She was just entirely, blissfully insulated from reality. When the market took a dip during my freshman year, my tuition got cut. When the market magically recovered 2 years later, Harper got a fully funded ride to a private liberal arts college, where she was currently undeclared, but leaning heavily toward communications. "Thanks," I said. I picked up the Metro card. It felt flimsy, sharp around the edges. "We'll see you in the bleachers, sweetie," Diane said, grabbing her Prada tote. "Text me when you get a seat so we know where to look." They filtered out through the garage door. The heavy, insulated steel door slammed shut. The house went dead silent. I stood alone in the kitchen, clutching a piece of cardboard, listening to the muffled, expensive purr of my father's Audi backing out of the driveway, taking my sister to get her graduation present for surviving her sophomore year of college. I walked to the fridge, poured myself a glass of tap water, drank it, and walked out the front door into the suffocating humidity of a June morning. The walk to the bus stop was exactly 1.2 miles. I know because I counted the cracks in the sidewalk to keep myself from turning around and throwing a rock through the front window of our house. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of wet asphalt and blooming magnolias, a cloying sweet scent that made my stomach turn. My graduation gown was in my backpack now, stuffed unceremoniously next to a half-empty water bottle and a crumpled program. I wore jeans and a faded band t-shirt, sweating through the cotton before I even reached the intersection. When the 4-2 North finally lumbered into view, its air brakes shrieking like a dying animal, it felt less like a rescue and more like a sentence. The doors hissed open, exhaling a blast of stale, over-conditioned air that smelled fiercely of ozone and old urine. I scanned the card. It beeped an angry, flat tone. Insufficient fare, the digital screen blinked. I stared at it. I pulled the card back and scanned it again. Beep, insufficient fare. The bus driver, a heavy-set man with a deeply lined face and a Pittsburgh Steelers cap, looked at me over his mirrored sunglasses. He didn't say a word, just let the silence stretch, while a line of 3 people formed behind me, sighing and shifting their weight. My father hadn't even checked the balance. He had just grabbed an old card from a drawer. My face burned. The humiliation wasn't a sharp sting. It was a slow, creeping flush that started in my neck and crawled up to my ears. I dug into the pocket of my jeans, my fingers frantically scraping against lint and a spare key, searching for loose change. I found 3 crumpled dollar bills and a handful of quarters. I fed them into the machine, the gears grinding and swallowing the money with agonizing slowness. I made my way down the aisle, bracing myself against the grab handles as the bus lurched forward. I found an empty seat near the back, right over the wheel well. The vinyl was cracked, patched with peeling duct tape. As I sat down, my thighs immediately stuck to the material. I leaned my head against the vibrating glass of the window. Outside, the suburbs melted away, replaced by strip malls, check cashing places, and fading billboards. This was the route I had taken for 4 years. While Harper was posting TikToks from a beach in Cabo for spring break, I was on this bus, reading macroeconomic textbooks under the flickering fluorescent light, trying to ignore the smell of the diesel exhaust leaking into the cabin. A man across the aisle, clutching a plastic bag full of crushed aluminum cans, caught my eye. He gave a slow, toothless nod. I nodded back. We were the morning ghosts. I closed my eyes, feeling the relentless thumping of the bus's suspension against my spine. I thought about the speech the valedictorian would inevitably give today. They would talk about support systems and the villages it took to get us here. They would tell us to look up into the stands and thank the parents who sacrificed everything for our success. My parents were currently negotiating an interest rate on a luxury electric vehicle for a girl whose biggest struggle this semester was deciding between rushing Delta Gamma or Kappa Alpha Theta. I felt a sudden, sharp pressure behind my eyes. Don't, I ordered myself. Do not cry on the 4-2 North. I took a deep, shaky breath, inhaling the scent of bleach and stale sweat. It grounded me. This was real. This gritty, vibrating, unglamorous reality was mine. I had built it with my own 2 hands, smelling of diner grease and library dust. I didn't owe them anything. By the time the bus pulled up to the University Transit Center, the sun was high and unforgiving. I stepped off onto the concrete, the heat radiating through the soles of my cheap flats. I pulled the wrinkled synthetic blue gown out of my backpack and slipped it over my head. It felt like putting on a trash bag. I adjusted the cap, making sure the tassel hung to the right. I caught my reflection in the tinted glass of the bus shelter. I looked tired, messy, and entirely alone. I smiled. A tight, cynical, razor-sharp smile. "Happy graduation, Sadie," I whispered to the glass. And then I started walking toward the stadium. The university stadium was a sea of blue polyester and nervous energy. The air was a chaotic mix of competing perfumes, cheap body spray, and the distinct metallic scent of thousands of folding chairs baking in the sun. I found my assigned seat in the middle of row 47, wedged between a guy who kept nervously bouncing his leg and a girl furiously reapplying lip gloss using her phone camera. The plastic chair dug into my lower back. I sat down, the gown bunching up uncomfortably around my waist, and looked up at the bleachers. Thousands of faces, thousands of waving hands, colorful signs and air horns waiting to be blasted. I squinted against the glare, scanning the VIP section, the middle tiers, the nosebleeds. Nothing. The ceremony began with the slow, agonizing drone of bagpipes. The speeches were exactly what I expected, a blur of platitudes about unprecedented times, chasing passions, and the dawn of a new tomorrow. I stared straight ahead, letting the words wash over me like white noise. An hour and a half later, my row stood up. We shuffled forward, a slow-moving conveyor belt of debt-ridden 20-somethings. As I approached the stairs to the stage, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out slightly, just enough to see the lock screen. Diane, Mom. Traffic was a nightmare. Parking now. So proud of you. I shoved the phone back into my pocket. They were missing it. Of course they were. Sadie Miller, the announcer, boomed over the loudspeakers. I walked across the stage. The turf beneath my feet felt spongy. The dean handed me a padded leather folder. I shook his hand. His palm was damp, his smile practiced and empty. There was polite applause from the crowd. No air horns, no screaming of my name, just the low murmur of thousands of people waiting for the next name to be called. I moved my tassel from right to left. It was done. 4 years of grinding, bleeding, and breaking myself in half, reduced to 10 seconds on a wooden stage. When the ceremony finally ended, the stadium dissolved into chaos. Families swarmed the field, clutching bouquets of grocery store roses and oversized mylar balloons. I navigated through the crush of crying, hugging bodies, feeling like a ghost. I found them in the outer parking lot, away from the immediate crush of the crowd. My father was standing with his hands on his hips, wearing his Ray-Bans, looking pleased with himself. Diane was adjusting her wide-brimmed straw hat. And there, parked diagonally across 2 spaces, was a gleaming, pristine, white Tesla Model Y. It had a massive, ridiculous red velvet bow stuck to the hood. Harper was leaning against the driver's side door, taking a selfie with it. I stopped walking. I just stood there, clutching my empty diploma cover, letting the heat of the blacktop seep through my shoes. The smell of hot asphalt and fresh tire rubber filled my nose. Diane spotted me. She waved frantically, her gold bracelets clinking together. "Sadie, over here!" I walked over, my legs feeling heavy, as if I were moving underwater. "Oh, sweetie!" Diane reached out and pulled me into a brief, one-armed hug. She smelled of mint gum and expensive sunscreen. "We saw you walk. You looked so beautiful up there. You just texted me that you were parking when they called my name," I said, my voice flat. Diane waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, the live stream. We had it on the iPad in the car." "Same thing." "Congratulations, kiddo," Richard said, patting me on the shoulder twice, a hollow, percussive sound. He didn't hug me. He immediately turned back to the car. "What do you think?" "Dual motor, long-range battery." The guy at the dealership tried to upsell me on the self-driving package, but I told him I wasn't born yesterday. I looked at the car. The white paint was blinding in the midday sun. It looked alien, completely out of place in the grimy university parking lot. "It's a car," I said. "It's not just a car, Sadie," Harper chimed in, finally putting her phone away. She walked over, twirling the matte black key card between her fingers. "It's a celebration, for both of us." I looked at her. "For both of us." "Well, yes," Diane stepped in, her voice pitching up an octave the way it always did when she was trying to force a narrative. "You graduating is huge, Sadie, obviously, but Harper had such a tough spring semester, with the sorority drama and switching her major, and she made the dean's list. We felt it was important to celebrate all the successes in the family today." I looked down at my hands. My knuckles were white around the fake leather of my diploma cover. I opened it. It was completely empty inside, just cream-colored silk. The actual diplomas would be mailed in 6 to 8 weeks. I had spent the morning on a bus that smelled of urine. I had paid my own way through 4 years of hell. I was holding an empty folder. And my sister had just been handed a $60,000 car for getting a B average and dropping a toxic friend group. I looked up at the three of them. They were all watching me, waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to smile, to play my part in the family play where I was the gritty, low-maintenance supporting character and Harper was the star. A laugh bubbled up in my throat. I couldn't stop it. It wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp, broken, and loud. I stood in the sweltering parking lot wearing a trash bag gown, laughing until my ribs ached. "Sadie," my father asked, taking a half step back, "are you all right?" I stopped laughing. I looked dead into my father's eyes, then at my mother, and finally at Harper, who looked genuinely confused. "I'm perfectly fine," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy calm. I let the empty diploma cover slip from my fingers. It hit the hot asphalt with a soft, pathetic thwack. "But I think I'm going to need a ride home." The ride back to the suburbs was a masterclass in suffocating silence, underscored by the faint, futuristic hum of dual electric motors. I sat in the back. The white vegan leather of the Model Y was mercilessly pristine. It didn't smell like a car. It smelled like an Apple Store, sharp, synthetic, and devoid of any human history. The air conditioning blasted through sleek, invisible vents, freezing the sweat that had pooled at the small of my back during the parking lot standoff. "So," Diane said from the passenger seat. She twisted around, the seatbelt cutting into her silk blouse. Her smile was brittle, stretched tight over a foundation of panic. "How was the speech? Did the valedictorian say anything inspiring?" We couldn't hear the audio well on the live stream. I looked at her. Her forehead was perfectly smooth, but the skin around her eyes betrayed a microscopic tremor of anxiety. She wanted me to play along. She wanted me to bridge the gap I had just blown open. "He talked about the village it takes to succeed," I said, my voice deliberately flat. I leaned back, deliberately pressing my damp, unwashed hair against the snowy headrest. I knew I had diner grease baked into my ends. I hoped it left a stain. "About the people who carry you when you can't carry yourself." Diane blinked. "That's nice." Yeah, it was hilarious. In the driver's seat, Harper giggled nervously. She was gripping the thick steering wheel at 10 and 2, her knuckles white. She kept glancing at the massive, glowing iPad bolted to the center console, terrified she was going to scratch her new toy. "Look at this map interface, though," Richard boomed from the back seat next to me. He had insisted on sitting in the back to experience the legroom, leaving Diane up front. He tapped the glass roof above his head with his knuckles. All glass. "Incredible engineering. The structural integrity is actually superior to steel." I turned my head and looked out the window. The strip malls and payday loan storefronts were blurring past, the exact same scenery I had stared at through the grime-streaked window of the 4-2 North just a few hours ago. Only now I was floating above it in a $60,000 isolation chamber. I felt a sudden, violent urge to open the door while we were moving at 60 miles an hour, just to see what they would do, just to hear the sterile silence break. "Sadie," Richard said, his tone shifting into his boardroom negotiation voice. "Look, I know the optics of today weren't ideal, but you have to understand the logistics." "The logistics," I repeated. "Yes. The dealership called at 8. If we didn't show up, they were going to give the allocation to someone else. And you had your Metro card. You're a resourceful girl. You've always been our independent one." Our independent one. The words hit my chest like a physical blow. Independent. It was the word they used to weaponize my survival against me. When I was 16 and needed braces, but the market took a dip, I was independent enough to live with an overbite until I paid for Invisalign myself at 21. When I needed a cosigner for a student loan and they refused because it would impact their debt-to-income ratio for a vacation home they never ended up buying, I was independent enough to work 40 hours a week at a diner while taking 18 credits. Harper wasn't independent. Harper was delicate. Harper needed a Tesla to recover from the emotional trauma of dropping a sorority. "I am independent," I said quietly, watching a pawn shop whip by. "Exactly," Diane chirped, turning back around, clearly relieved. Conflict averted. narrative restored, and we are so proud of you. That's why we got reservations at the Capitol Grill for tonight, 7 o'clock, a real celebration. Just the four of us. I'm not going, I said. The car swerved slightly as Harper flinched. The lane departure warning chimed a soft, polite, utterly infuriating little bell. What do you mean you're not going? Richard asked. It's your graduation dinner. I'm not going. I picked at a loose thread on the hem of my jeans. I have a shift at the diner at 4. And after that, I'm done. A shift? Diane's voice pitched up, tight and thin. Today? Sadie, you graduated today. You can't call in? I don't want to call in. It was the truth. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old fry oil, but the people there looked me in the eye. When my manager, a chain-smoking woman named Brenda, found out I was graduating, she slipped a $50 bill into my apron pocket and told me to buy a decent bottle of tequila. It was more than my parents had given me all year. Sadie, don't be ridiculous, Richard snapped. The boardroom patience was gone. We put down a $200 deposit for the private room. You are going to dinner. I turned to look at my father. He was a handsome man, aging out of a Brooks Brothers catalog, his jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. He was used to people bending. Cancel it, I said, or take Harper. Celebrate her dean's list. You're acting like a child, he said, his voice dropping into a register of pure disgust. You're punishing us because of a car? Because of scheduling? My chest tightened. The breath got trapped somewhere behind my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to list every missed tuition payment, every empty promise, every holiday I spent smelling like grease while they drank champagne. I wanted to articulate the exact, agonizing geometry of the space between me and my sister. But the words felt too big, too jagged to push through my throat. And worse, a tiny, pathetic part of me felt guilty. I was ruining the day. I was the dark cloud in the white leather car. I'm not punishing you, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I hated the shake. I clamped my teeth down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I'm just going to work. Nobody spoke for the rest of the ride. The polite synthetic silence returned, heavier this time, pressing against my eardrums until we finally pulled into the driveway. Harper parked the car. She put it in park, and the screen flashed a happy little animation. I didn't wait for them. I opened the door, stepped out into the humid suburban air, and walked into the house without looking back. The house was 68 degrees, mechanically cooled and smelling faintly of crushed eucalyptus and cedarwood. It was a beautiful, hollow structure. Wide plank oak floors, vaulted ceilings, massive floor-to-ceiling windows that pooled harsh afternoon light onto the Persian rugs. I stood in the foyer, letting the heavy mahogany front door click shut behind me. The deadbolt engaged with a heavy, expensive thud. I slipped off my cheap flats. My bare feet registered the chill of the hardwood. I realized, looking at the pristine white baseboards, that I felt absolutely nothing for this place. It wasn't a home. It was a museum of a life I was merely spectating. I walked up the carpeted stairs, my calves aching from the tension of the day. My room was tucked at the end of the hall, a smaller guest room Diane had painted agreeable gray during a brief manic phase where she considered opening a home staging business. I dragged my faded canvas duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet. It was coated in a thin layer of dust. When I pulled the zipper, the metal teeth caught on a frayed thread, protesting with a harsh screech before ripping open. I didn't have a spreadsheet for this. I didn't have a logistical plan. I just had the suffocating, absolute certainty that if I slept in this bed tonight, I would never leave. I started packing with a chaotic, uncalculated rhythm. I bypassed the sweaters Diane had bought me on clearance and went straight for my own purchases. I grabbed my diner uniforms, 3 black polyester shirts, stiff with industrial detergent and the phantom smell of old fry oil, and rolled them up, shoving them into the corners of the bag. Next came the worn denim, the mismatched socks, the faded band tees. Then came the weight. I pulled my heavily highlighted copy of The Wealth of Nations and a thick macroeconomics textbook from my desk. They dropped into the canvas belly of the bag with a heavy, satisfying thud. The canvas warped and sagged. I liked the weight. It anchored the bag. It was the only thing in this room that possessed actual, undeniable value. I walked into the adjoining bathroom, opening the medicine cabinet. I bypassed the row of La Mer sample creams and unopened hyaluronic serums Diane had dumped in my stocking last Christmas. I grabbed my half-empty tube of drugstore toothpaste, my contact lens solution, and a plastic hairbrush with missing bristles. A floorboard groaned in the hallway, a long, drawn-out creak. I stopped moving, a plastic bottle of ibuprofen clutched in my fist. I didn't turn around. I kept my back to the door, staring at my pale, sweaty reflection in the vanity mirror. My hands were shaking, a pathetic, humiliating tremor in my fingers. Sadie. It was Diane. Her voice was entirely stripped of its high-pitched, performative cheer. She didn't sound angry. She sounded incredibly, deeply tired. Like a woman who had spent 22 years maintaining a facade that was finally cracking down the center. I turned. She was leaning against the doorframe, still wearing her wide-brimmed straw hat, though it was now slightly askew. The harsh hallway light caught the fine lines around her mouth, the ones Botox couldn't quite erase. She looked at the bulging canvas bag on the bed, then at the empty plastic hangers swaying gently in the closet. "What are you doing?" she asked. It wasn't an accusation. The pitch was flat. "I'm going to Brenda's," I said, shoving the ibuprofen into the side pocket of the bag. Brenda's duplex smelled like wet cat food and was located 50 feet from a noisy freight train line, but the spare room had a door that locked. "You're moving out." She tested the words on her tongue, waiting for me to correct her. "Yes." Diane crossed her arms over her chest, her manicured nails digging into the silk of her blouse, because of the car. A bitter laugh scraped the back of my throat. "It's not about the car, Diane." She flinched at her first name. I usually only used it in my head, a silent rebellion. Hearing it out loud made the air in the room suddenly very thin. "Then explain it to me," she demanded, her voice rising. A sudden spark of genuine, ugly anger broke through her fatigue. "Because from where I'm standing, you're throwing a massive, theatrical tantrum because your sister got a graduation present and you had to sit on a bus." "I had to sit on a bus," I started, stepping away from the bed. The anger was hot and blinding, vibrating in my teeth, but beneath it was a sickening wave of fear. "I have $400 in my checking account." I pushed the fear down. "I had to sit on a bus because you and Dad forgot about me." Again, "We didn't forget you. You handed me a declined Metro card for a bus that smells like stale urine on the morning of my college graduation," I yelled. The sound of my own voice startled me. It was raw, echoing off the gray walls. "You didn't even check the balance. You didn't care enough to make sure I could actually get to the stadium to receive a degree I paid for myself, because you two backed out on me." Diane took a step back, her hand flying to her throat, defensive. "Sadie, the market." "Stop talking about the market," I stepped forward. "The market was fine when Dad leased the Audi. The market was fine when you tore out perfectly good granite for marble. The market is miraculously fine for a dual-motor Tesla. The market only crashes when it comes to me." The silence that followed was suffocating. The air conditioning kicked on with a low hum. Diane stared at me. Her mouth opened, closed, and opened again. She looked bewildered, as if the beige wallpaper had suddenly started screaming at her. "You are so deeply resentful," she whispered finally. The words hit me like cold water. The hot panic of my anger extinguished instantly. She was right. I was a bitter, exhausted, deeply resentful 22-year-old. I carried it in my shoulders, in the way I ground my teeth at night. "I am," I said, my voice dropping back to a quiet, steady rhythm. "I really am, and I don't want to be anymore. It's killing me." Heavy footsteps pounded up the carpeted stairs. Richard appeared behind Diane, his face flushed, his silk tie loosened and pulled crooked. He had heard the shouting. "What in God's name is going on up here?" he demanded. He looked at Diane's pale face, then at me, then at the duffel bag. He let out a long, heavy sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose. The corporate fixer had arrived. For God's sake, Sadie, enough with the dramatics. It's exhausting. He reached into the back pocket of his slacks and pulled out his silver money clip. He peeled off 5 crisp $100 bills. He held them out toward me, the green paper stiff and mocking. "Here," he said, his tone authoritative, settling the ledger. "Get yourself a nice dinner tonight. Buy some new clothes for your interviews. We'll sit down and talk about a down payment on a reliable used Honda next week. Just stop this." I looked at the money. My stomach gnawed at itself. $500 was rent. $500 was groceries for 2 months. A dark, survivalist part of my brain screamed at me to take it, to swallow the pride, grab the cash, and walk out. But it was a trap. It was the exact currency they used to buy my silence and absolve their guilt. "Keep it," I said. My voice didn't shake. I grabbed the handles of my duffel bag. It was awkwardly heavy, the textbooks throwing me off balance. I hitched the canvas strap up onto my shoulder. It dug immediately into my collarbone. "Sadie, take the damn money," he said, his voice hardening, thrusting his hand closer. "I don't want it." I walked toward the door. Diane stepped out of the way, pressing her back against the door jamb. Richard stood dead in the center of the hall, planting his feet, blocking my path. "If you walk out that door right now," Richard warned, his voice dropping an octave, low and dangerous, "you're doing it on your own. Don't come crying when reality hits." I stopped. I looked him dead in the eye. I noted the faint burst capillaries on his cheeks, the expensive cologne that smelled like pepper and bergamot, the absolute arrogant certainty in his gaze that I would fold. "I've been doing it on my own for 4 years, Dad," I said quietly. I pushed past him. My shoulder bumped against his chest, hard enough to make him shift his weight. He didn't reach out. He didn't try to stop me again. I walked down the stairs, the bag banging awkwardly against the wooden banister. Each step felt incredibly heavy, yet entirely necessary. I walked through the foyer, past the massive windows, and pushed the heavy mahogany door open. The heat hit me instantly, a thick, humid wall of suburban air. I walked down the driveway, the canvas strap burning my skin. I passed the gleaming white Tesla, parked perfectly between the lines, its glass roof reflecting the harsh summer sun. I had ordered an Uber from my phone while I was pulling clothes from the closet. I couldn't afford it. It was going to cost me $30. I desperately needed. But I couldn't walk to the 42 North right now. I reached the corner of the subdivision. The Uber, a beat-up silver Hyundai with a dented rear bumper, was idling by the curb. The driver, a woman with graying hair, pulled into a tight ponytail, popped the trunk. I heaved the duffel bag inside. The textbooks hit the metal floorboard with a heavy, final thud. I got into the back seat. The gray fabric was stained, and the air conditioning was weak. It smelled intensely of vanilla tree, air fresheners, and old cigarette smoke. It wasn't vegan leather. It wasn't silent. "Brenda's Diner on 4th?" the driver asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "Yeah," I said, leaning my head against the warm, vibrating glass of the window. "Take the highway." The car pulled away from the curb. I watched the manicured lawns and identical brick facades of the subdivision roll past, getting smaller and smaller until they vanished behind a line of oak trees. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. 3 missed calls from Richard. 2 texts from Harper asking where I went. I held down the side button. The screen asked me to confirm power off. I swiped right. The screen went black, turning into a piece of dark, silent glass. I closed my eyes. The suspension of the Hyundai rattled violently as we hit a pothole on the on-ramp. The road ahead was loud, grimy, and entirely unmapped. But as the engine whined, pulling me away from the sterile silence and into the terrifying, messy reality of my own life, I realized something. My hands had stopped shaking. Family dynamics can be a suffocating white leather trap or a gritty bus ride to nowhere, but sometimes walking away is the only way to find your own route. If Sadie's raw, unapologetic escape hit home for you, smash that like button and share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more deeply human, unfiltered drama every week. Tell me in the comments, would you have taken the money